Caught the chandeliers caught the sunlight just so, too perfect, too cold. The music swirled in soft cello tones, wrapping around laughter I didn't belong to. I stood at the edge of the marble foyer, clutching the quilt tighter. My best dress, beige with small rose embroidery, suddenly felt invisible. Like me. No one turned. April hadn't seen me yet. She was glowing under the arch of white lilies, veil fluttering gently in the early autumn breeze. The same breeze that tugged at my thinning gray hair. I took one small step inside. Tyler's voice cracked across the music like a whip. "She's just the nanny. Get her out, or everything stopped." The string quartet faltered. The murmurs froze. My heart didn't beat, it clenched. A server nearby looked up, startled, holding a tray of champagne. Her eyes darted to me, then away. I didn't move. My hands gripped the quilt, the one I'd spent 6 months sewing. Bits of April's childhood stitched into it, her first ballot ribbon, the corner of a kindergarten finger painting, even fabric from her father's baby shirt. Now she was marrying under someone else's name in a place I had built, and no one knew it. Not even her. "Ma'am." A young man in a gray suit approached. He couldn't have been older than 25. Polite. Hesitant. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." My voice didn't come. My lips parted, but only air escaped. I looked past him. April laughed at something her maid of honor whispered. My son stood stiffly beside her, red creeping up his collar. Monica, my daughter-in-law, turned. She wore pearl heels and the same condescending smile she always gave me. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She planned this. I turned slowly, my old heels clicking faintly on the marble floor. The quilt in my arms felt heavier with every step toward the door. I made it out before I cried. Almost. Outside, the cool Oregon air cut through my skin. I held the quilt tight against my chest, trying to remember how to breathe. They erased me. Just like that. A woman in a navy pantsuit passed me at the gate, barely glancing. I was background noise. The very hall they stood in, the Briar House estate, had once been a forgotten place with broken windows and mold behind the stage curtains. I had cleaned it on my knees. I had bought it quietly during a tax sale no one cared about. I rebuilt it, renamed it, and I let them book it for free. Tyler didn't know. April didn't know. But Monica suspected, and now she'd made sure I would never forget my place. I sat in my car for a long time, the quilt spread over my lap like a secret. The sun dipped lower behind the spruce trees. Laughter floated from the patio. "She's just the nanny? Not even my mother? Not even her grandmother?"
Oh, just the nanny.
I ran my fingers along a patch of old denim, Tyler's jeans when he was 5. I stitched that in after he stopped returning my calls. 6 months of work, hundreds of memories, thrown out like stale cake. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Because tomorrow something would change. No one saw it coming, not even Monica, not even Tyler. The train ride back to Astoria smelled like wet wool and metal. I remember staring out the fogged window, one hand cradling Tyler's sleeping head against my shoulder, the other holding a folded newspaper with my husband's obituary. Rob died in a logging accident on Mount Hood. They said it was quick. They always say that. It doesn't make the silence any softer. I was 39, a widow, a mother, and completely unprepared. The life we'd built in Portland dissolved overnight. Bills I didn't know existed. Loans I didn't understand. Rob had taken care of everything until he didn't. I sold the house. What little we had left fit into 2 suitcases and a diaper bag. Astoria was the only place I had roots. My aunt left me a trailer off 5th Street. It smelled like mold and sadness, but it didn't charge rent. The day I walked into the Briar House for the first time, it was still a theater. The velvet curtains sagged with mildew. The lobby smelled like old popcorn and spilled soda. I asked for a job, any job. The manager looked at my worn hands and said, "We always need cleaners." That first week, I cleaned bathrooms so foul I came home and cried on the floor. But Tyler needed food, preschool fees, shoes that fit, so I kept scrubbing at night. I boiled potatoes and listened to his soft snores from the other room. I remember the click of his toy truck across the linoleum. How he'd say, "Mom, you're the strongest lady in the world." I didn't feel strong, but I learned how to buff marble without streaks, how to mix vinegar and lemon to get out old gum, how to smile and nod when guests dropped champagne on the floor and said, "You missed a spot." And slowly, the Briar House became familiar. The creak of the second stair, the smell of polish and faint roses after a wedding, the soft hum of string quartets during rehearsals. It didn't feel grand. It felt steady, like something I could build on. 15 years passed before anyone even noticed I knew more about that place than most managers. And by then, I'd already bought it. But that's later. Right now, I was just the invisible cleaner, the tired woman in thrift store shoes, holding a little boy's hand and dreaming that maybe one day we'd be invited inside. The train ride back to Astoria smelled like wet wool and metal. I remember staring out the fogged window, one hand cradling Tyler's sleeping head against my shoulder, the other holding a folded newspaper with my husband's obituary. Rob died in a logging accident on Mount Hood. They said it was quick. They always say that. It doesn't make the silence any softer. I was 39, a widower, and completely unprepared. The life we'd built in Portland dissolved overnight. Bills I didn't know existed, loans I didn't understand. Rob had taken care of everything, until he didn't. I sold the house. What little we had left fit into 2 suitcases and a diaper bag. Astoria was the only place I had roots. My aunt left me a trailer off 5th Street. It smelled like mold and sadness, but it didn't charge rent. The day I walked into the Briar House for the first time, it was still a theater. The velvet curtains sagged with mildew. The lobby smelled like old popcorn and spilled soda. I asked for a job, any job. The manager looked at my worn hands and said, "We always need cleaners." That first week, I cleaned bathrooms so foul I came home and cried on the floor. But Tyler needed food, preschool fees, shoes that fit, so I kept scrubbing. At night, I boiled potatoes and listened to his soft snores from the other room. I remember the click of his toy truck across the linoleum, how he'd say, "Mom, you're the strongest lady in the world." I didn't feel strong, but I learned how to buff marble without streaks, how to mix vinegar and lemon to get out old gum, how to smile and nod when guests dropped champagne on the floor and said, "You missed a spot." And slowly, the Briar House became familiar. The creak of the second stair, the smell of polish and faint roses after a wedding, the soft hum of string quartets during rehearsals. It didn't feel grand. It felt steady, like something I could build on. 15 years passed before anyone even noticed I knew more about that place than most managers. And by then, I'd already bought it. But that's later. Right now, I was just the invisible cleaner, the tired woman in thrift store shoes, holding a little boy's hand and dreaming that maybe one day we'd be invited inside. Chapter 2, Part 2, Target 500 words. The first time I ever thought about owning the Briar House, it was pouring rain. I was scrubbing the grand staircase while thunder rattled the windows. Mr. Halvorson, the old manager, stormed in with a notice in hand.
They're shutting it down,
he said. Can't keep the doors open another month. I remember standing there with a bucket in one hand, bleach stinging my wrists, staring at the faded burgundy carpet. Something inside me whispered, "Don't let it go." At night, I stayed after hours and walked through the darkened halls. I memorized every creak, every draft, every loose tile. I fixed what I could. Quietly, Mr. Halvorson let me paint the lobby when no one else wanted to. I chose cream and green, fresh but classic. I started organizing the linen closet, tracking inventory, even managing deliveries. Not because I was asked, because I cared. Then came the county tax auction. Halvorson handed me the flyer. It's going for almost nothing. No one wants a broken theater. I looked at the flyer for a long time. Then I looked at Tyler, 10 years old, coloring dinosaurs on the back of a receipt. My hands shook. I cashed out half of Rob's life insurance. What little was left, I got a loan from the local credit union. And one foggy morning I signed my name. Just like that, I became the owner of a place no one believed in. But I didn't tell a soul. I kept wearing the apron. I kept cleaning. I let new managers come and go. I became part of the wallpaper, and when it finally reopened as an event space years later, nobody remembered where the idea came from. That was fine by me. The glory wasn't the point. Stability was. By the time April was born, the Briar House was booked 6 months out. And on her 5th birthday, when she twirled in the grand ballroom wearing a yellow tutu, I stood in the back holding cupcakes I baked myself. She called me Miss Ellie that day. Monica taught her to. I smiled anyway, because just seeing her dance under those chandeliers was enough, back then. But love, when unseen long enough, starts to ache. And the achy has a way of growing teeth. It was supposed to be a small family dinner, just 10 of us. Birthday candles, pot roast paper streamers taped to the window. Nothing fancy. But Monica made it feel like a performance. She had the place settings printed with names. Hers in bold gold. Mine written Illy in lowercase cursive, no last name, no title. My seat? At the far end of the table, next to the coat rack. "Oops," she said with a practiced laugh. "Must have been a mix-up. But I'm sure you don't mind, do you?" I shook my head. No one made room. The candles flickered in the draft. My plate was the only one mismatched. The napkin was paper when everyone else had cloth. I ate in silence while Monica told a story about renovating their kitchen. "It's all custom now," she said, swirling wine. "Imported tiles, touchless faucets. You know, elegant but clean. Not everyone likes clutter." Her eyes landed on me like ice cubes. Tyler didn't say anything. I hadn't expected him to. "I wish I had your gift," she added, tilting her head toward me. "You do so much with so little." I smiled tightly, chewing roasted carrot like it might bite back. No one laughed. Not even April. She kept glancing between me and her mother, like trying to decode something she wasn't meant to see. I didn't speak much that night, just helped clear the table, carried a tray to the sink. "Ellie, you don't need to fuss," Monica called out. "We've got help for that." I stayed anyway. Scrubbed a stubborn gravy stain until my wrist ached. In the hallway, I passed a mirror. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman in it. Hair frizzy, eyes tired, blouse faintly stained with punch. When did I become a guest in my own story? Later, I stepped out to get some air. April followed. She was in socks, tiptoeing over gravel like it was a game. "Why do you always leave early?" she asked, squinting up at me. I bent down, touched her hair. "Fine and straight, just like Tyler's." "Because sometimes people don't notice you've stayed," I said. She didn't understand. Not yet. But she would. Monica's voice could turn silk into sandpaper. "Ellie, dear, would you mind grabbing some napkins from the back table?" She didn't look at me when she said it, just waved a manicured hand and smiled toward the other guests like I was a shadow she'd trained to move. I stood in the far corner of their townhouse, boxed between a coat rack and a side table stacked with untouched hors d'oeuvres. The party was for Tyler's promotion, something about a regional team lead in Seattle. I hadn't caught the title. I was too busy trying to stay out of the pictures. Monica had set the seating chart herself, every place card printed in gold. I didn't have one. She handed me a paper plate and said, "You're fine over here, closer to the patio." Closer to the exit, she meant. I sat near the French doors, next to a squeaky plant stand. No one noticed, or pretended not to. Tyler gave a short toast, thanking our families, mentors, and most of all Monica for always believing in me. He didn't look in my direction once. When they popped the champagne, Monica leaned toward me and said, "You've done so much with so little, Ellie. It's honestly inspiring." I smiled, the kind of smile you wear when there's no air left in the room. April came over later, a little tipsy and heels too high for her, and plopped beside me. "Miss Ellie, you should try the shrimp. It's amazing." She still called me that, Miss Ellie, because that's what Monica taught her. Not Grandma,
Not Nana.
just Ellie. I ran a hand along the fold of my skirt, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there. April scrolled through her phone, showing me dress ideas for a wedding I hadn't been asked to help plan. "Look at this one," she said. "I think Mom wants something more couture, but this one feels more me." It was a simple ivory dress, soft neckline, no glitter, just elegance. "That's lovely," I said, voice low. "It's very you." She beamed and turned away before I could say more. I watched her laugh with her bridesmaids by the wine rack, still the same little girl who once danced through Briarhouse in a tutu, holding a plastic tiara like it was royal. And I was still the same woman in the background, still the quiet helper, still the shadow. But something flickered that day, right between the click of Monica's heels and April's soft laugh. A small, sharp thought I hadn't dared form before. Maybe they didn't just forget me? Maybe they erased me on purpose. I left before dessert. Monica sent me a text 5 minutes after I closed the door behind me. "Thanks for coming. Ellie! The shrimp went fast. Hope you got some I hadn't." I stood outside on the narrow sidewalk, cool air brushing against my arms as I stared at her message. My name glowed on the screen, stripped of any meaning. Ellie. Not Mom, not even Eleanor, just utility. The walk to my car felt longer than usual. My knees ached. The quilt I'd been working on sat folded on the passenger seat, half-stitched and waiting, like a conversation I kept putting off. As I turned onto Main Street, I passed the Briarhouse. It stood tall and elegant against the early evening light, the new sconces casting golden arcs across the whitewashed stone. A banner hung just under the second-story window. Hussey Annual Winter Showcase Creative Direction Monica Grievous Drive. My foot eased off the gas. I parked 2 blocks down and walked back, slowly. My breath fogged the glass as I stood outside the front doors. Through them, the lobby sparkled. Fresh roses in tall crystal vases, polished marble that caught the chandeliers like water. But I didn't see any of that. All I saw was her name. On my walls, on my work. Hanging like a crown she never earned. I blinked hard. Creative direction. I never approved that, never signed off, never discussed it with anyone. But there it was, printed and bold, above the logo I designed 10 years ago. Did she think I wouldn't notice? Or did she know I wouldn't say anything? That was the thing about staying silent for too long. People start to believe it's your natural state. They forget there's a voice behind the quiet. I stepped back from the doors and turned away. The quilt sat heavy in my lap again when I got home. I traced one corner, April's childhood dress hem hand-stitched into the border. I could still smell the lavender soap I used to wash it, the faint trace of her when she'd run into my arms. She didn't know, she didn't see. But Monica, she saw enough to take. My name, my work, my place. I folded the quilt and placed it on the table. Then I reached into the bottom drawer of my sideboard and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in 5 years. Property deeds. Receipts. Tax records, and one letter. A letter Monica had written 2 years ago asking if I'd consider stepping back from day-to-day decisions. I hadn't answered then, but maybe it was time. The next morning I opened the letter again. Cream stationery. Expensive. Her signature in looping blue ink. Dear Eleanor, it began, formal, like we were business associates instead of family. She wrote about streamlining, the brand, about needing a cohesive public image for future clients, about how my continued presence, though appreciated, might create confusion. I remembered reading it the first time and laughing out loud. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The Briar House was mine. She'd never cleaned its bathrooms at 2 a.m. during flood season, never repainted the stairwell with her own paycheck, never patched a roof in the middle of a thunderstorm with a tarp and hope. But Monica wrote like she was doing me a favor, like stepping back was a gift. I'd filed the letter away, thinking it was easier to let her feel important, easier to stay quiet. Now I saw it for what it was, a warning dressed in sugar. That same day, I got a call from Madison at the florist's desk. Miss Ellie, just confirming. Monica sent over a full redesign for the wedding centerpiece contracts. Said you'd signed off. I hadn't. She also wants the delivery team rerouted through the back entrance, Madison added. Less visibility for older staff, she said. I sat there, the phone pressed to my cheek, staring at the rose bush outside my window. The thorns were showing through the frost. Older staff. That's what I was to her. Not a founder, not a matriarch, a liability. I didn't respond to Madison. I didn't scream or cry. I just hung up, walked into my small kitchen, and brewed a pot of coffee. The smell filled the trailer, earthy, bitter grounding. Then I opened my laptop. I went into the Briar House booking system. Quietly revoked Monica's admin access, reset her password, disabled her visibility on the vendor logs. I called the accountant and asked for a full report of the past 3 years. Not a summary, the raw data. Then I sent an email to the attorney who'd helped me incorporate Briar House Events LLC 15 years ago. Subject: need to talk, urgent. I didn't plan a grand confrontation, I planned the truth. Because sometimes silence isn't grace, it's erasure, and I'd been slowly disappearing, one centerpiece at a time. The email reply came faster than I expected. Of course, Eleanor. My office is open Tuesday at 9 a.m. L. Brenner. Lydia Brenner had gray streaks now, same as me. She helped me structure the Briar House under my name but through a holding LLC to keep things clean. Discreet? Private then? I didn't want Tyler growing up thinking success was handed to him. I wanted him to rise on his own merit, the way I had too. But now, that privacy had been weaponized against me. At the appointment, Lydia laid out the folder I hadn't opened in years. Ownership papers, filings, bylaws, all signed, all airtight. Technically, she said, peering over her glasses, you could remove Monica from all operations effective immediately. Her name appears nowhere in legal ownership or management. I nodded slowly. But if you want to do it cleanly, quietly, you'll need documentation, timeline, any misses of title, public misrepresentation, anything showing she claimed control without authority. I didn't blink. I have receipts, I said. At home that night I dug deeper. My filing cabinet clicked open like a box of bones, old emails, postcards from April, handwritten vendor notes, and Monica's name everywhere. Creative director, owner, host. She hadn't just taken over the floral contracts. She'd used Briar House's name to landside clients, corporate events. A branding seminar for elevated women entrepreneurs, hosted in our ballroom, without my permission but under my roof. It wasn't just gall. It was theft. She was monetizing my silence. I found an email from a bridal magazine dated 6 months ago. Thank you, Monica, for your exclusive behind-the-scenes access to Briar House. Readers loved your quote about building it from the ground up. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. From the ground up. She wasn't there when I scraped gum off the dance floor. She wasn't there when the pipes burst in '09 and I bailed water out with a mop bucket and prayer. She didn't build anything but lies. And Tyler? He never questioned it. Maybe he didn't want to. April was too young to know better. She thought the Briar House just existed. Elegant, blooming, eternal. She'd never seen the mildew, the rat traps, the winter we ran weddings in coats because the heat broke. I closed the laptop. For the first time in months, I didn't feel tired. I felt awake. And when I looked at that quilt on the table, still unfinished, I realized I'd been suing the wrong story. It wasn't a gift, it was a ledger of every piece of me they'd forgotten. But I hadn't. April stopped calling. At first it was subtle, texts instead of phone calls, replies delayed by hours.
Pussy week,
She'd say, or sorry, swamped with venue walkthroughs. But then she stopped replying altogether. I left voicemails. Just simple ones? Hi, sweetheart, just checking in. Let me know if you need help with anything. Silence. Monica answered once. Her voice sugary? Oh, Ellie, April's got so much going on right now. You remember how weddings are.
I did.
Just not like this? The last message I got from April was a forwarded Pinterest board of color swatches. No greeting, no signature, just a digital mood board labeled Monica's palette, Sika, not April's. I stared at it on my phone, thumb hovering over the reply button, then set it down. Some weeks, I'd bake something and bring it by. A pie, cinnamon rolls, shortbread cookies. April used to love my shortbread, but every time Monica opened the door with a tight smile. Oh, you didn't have to do that. We're trying to stay gluten-free. Or Ellie, we're out the door. Just drop it in the kitchen. I stood there once, holding a pie still warm from the oven, while April rushed past me in heels, not even making eye contact. My arms felt heavier than the pie. The kitchen smelled of something artificial, a candle, lemon basil, and white tea, nothing real. That night I sat at my table unwrapping the leftover pie and eating a slice alone. The crust crumbled under my fork flaky, hollow. It was a Thursday afternoon, cold and overcast, when a knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find April. No makeup. Hair in a loose braid, eyes rimmed red. Hey, Miss Ellie, she said, her voice low.
Not Grandma.
Not Nana.
But something in the way she said Ellie, it shook. She held out a dress bag. My seamstress flaked. Mom's furious. The hem still pinned but unfinished. Can you... She didn't finish the sentence. I took the bag. Of course I took it. The fabric was soft and simple, ivory crepe with a high neckline. No beads, no lace, no drama. It was exactly the kind of dress I'd picked for myself decades ago, before Rob said I'd look better in blue. April watched me smooth the fabric over my table, her fingers twitching. I don't know why I came here, she said suddenly. It's like I just needed it to feel real for a second. I nodded. We didn't speak after that. She left without hugging me. But she left the dress behind, and that was enough to start a seam. I worked on the dress at night. The house was quiet, just the soft creak of my rocking chair and the faint hum of my needle pushing through fabric. April had pinned the hem unevenly, a rush job. I undid every pin and started fresh, one stitch at a time, like mending something deeper than cloth. As I worked, I remembered her as a child, feet bare on the ballroom floor, spinning in that yellow tutu. How she used to fall asleep in my lap after rehearsals, hands sticky from lemonade and cake frosting. Those memories stitched themselves into the thread. Saturday morning, I wrapped the dress in white tissue and laid it gently into the bag. No perfume, no note. Just clean lines and love no one could see. I drove to April's apartment. When I rang the bell, Monica opened the door. She looked surprised and tired. Her blouse was wrinkled. No earrings? Ali, she said, voice cautious. We weren't expecting you. I finished the hem, I said. She blinked, looked behind her, then stepped aside reluctantly. April stood in the hallway barefoot, holding a mug. Her eyes flicked down to the bag. I'll take it to my room, she mumbled. Monica didn't invite me in. But I stepped over the threshold anyway. I'd like to see it on her, I said simply. April hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes later, she stepped out of her bedroom wearing the dress. It fit perfectly, not just the measurements. The feel, the quiet strength of it. She stood in front of the hallway mirror, hands smoothing the fabric down her hips. Her reflection stared back at her like a version she hadn't seen in years. She turned to me. It feels like mine now. I swallowed a breath. It is. Monica hovered in the background, arms crossed. We're still waiting for the designer dress to ship. Just in case? April didn't respond. She just kept looking in the mirror. That night, I got no thank you. No follow-up call. But on Sunday morning, I opened my mailbox and found a folded note inside. Miss Ellie, thanks for the hem. I wore it again last night just to feel something real. No flourish. No hearts. Just ink, paper, and maybe the beginning of something mended. But even as I folded the note, a question lingered. Would love be enough to change what Monica had already stolen? Or was it too late to stitch it all back together? Target. 650 words. Who the invitation arrived without a name. Just thick white cardstock, gold lettering, and a wax seal pressed with a generic crest. No, dear Eleanor. No, Miss Ellie. I stared at it on the counter for a long time. It was for the final walkthrough before the wedding. Venue access opens at 2 p.m. for approved guests. Approved. I laughed just once. Then folded the card and tucked it back into its envelope. Briar House. My name wasn't on the invite, but my money paid for the candles, the florals, the champagne pyramid Monica insisted on. Still, I showed up. I wore a navy pantsuit I hadn't taken out in years. Tyler used to say it made me look like a judge. I liked that. When I arrived, Monica stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, barking orders at the florists. She saw me. And for a second, her smile faltered. But only for a second. Ellie, she called, waving me over like I was one of the vendors. Can you double? Check the linens in the East Room. We had a last-minute change. I blinked, then nodded. I walked straight past her, past the wedding planner, past the nervous assistants tapping on iPads, and into my building. The chandeliers had just been polished. The floors gleamed. But something about it felt foreign, like someone had rearranged my home while I was asleep. In the East Ballroom, the long tables were dressed in white linen, soft gold accents, chairs with tulle bows. It looked lovely, expensive, lifeless. A woman I didn't recognize was placing place cards. Excuse me? I said, voice steady. Could I see the guest list? She looked confused but handed me the sheet without protest. I scanned it quickly. My name wasn't there, not even as Miss Ellie. I closed the clipboard. Monica entered a moment later. She was holding a glass of white wine, even though it wasn't yet 3. Oh, Ellie, she said, voice syrupy. There's been a slight oversight. I meant to talk to Tyler about your seat. You know how these RSVPs are. I said nothing. She tilted her head. You're still welcome to help with the setup, of course. I looked at her. Really looked. Lipstick too red, roots showing under the blonde. Her smile strained. And for the first time, I felt no shame. No heat in my cheeks, no ache behind my ribs. Just clarity. I was done helping, done folding, done pretending this was kindness, not control. Thank you, Monica, I said, voice calm. But I won't be staying for the rehearsal. She blinked. Oh, are you sure? I turned toward the tall windows and saw April outside, laughing with bridesmaids. She didn't know I was here. Maybe she never would. But I was done waiting to be seen. Positive, I said. I walked out slowly, heels clicking against my own floors. No one followed. No one stopped me. But something shifted in the room. The air behind me felt lighter. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked along the bluff behind the Briar House, where the land curls just above the sea. The wind carried salt and lilacs. Waves murmured far below. There used to be a bench up here. Tyler built it for my birthday when he was 15. 2 planks of cedar and uneven nails. I found it still standing, weathered but sturdy. Like me, I sat, closed my eyes, listened, not to voices, not to demands, just wind and memory. A woman builds a life like a quilt, one patch at a time. Pain, joy, fatigue, hope, stitched side by side. Mine had been sewn in silence for too long. April's dress hem was only the latest seam. I thought of all the rooms I'd cleaned, all the silver I'd polished, the years I fed a legacy no one thought to name mine. Until now, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A text from Tyler. Hey, Mom, just checking in. Monica said you left early. Everything okay? I stared at the message. Not. Why didn't you stay? Not. Sorry, I didn't include you. Just, is everything okay? I typed a reply, then deleted it. Again and again. Until finally I wrote of yes. Everything's finally clear. I hit send, then turned my phone off. That evening, I pulled out the red folder Lydia helped me assemble inside. Timeline, statements, screenshots, press clippings with Monica's name where mine should have been. She'd branded herself the architect of something I built alone, on bleeding feet and borrowed faith. I tucked in the final document, my letter of public reassertion of ownership. It didn't need venom. It only needed truth. At the bottom, I added a note to whom it may concern. Briar House belongs to the woman who bled for its floorboards. Sincerely, Eleanor Ruth Greaves, sole founder and owner. Said I sealed the folder. Wrote a name on the front F April, and placed it gently beside the finished quilt. It was time. If someone tried to erase your life's work behind your back, would you speak up, or stay silent to keep the peace? Let me know in the comments below. You're not invisible here. The morning of the wedding, the Briar House sparkled. April's favorite white roses lined the staircase. Gold-rimmed glasses glinted beneath chandeliers. The scent of citrus polish and garden peonies drifted through every corridor. Guests began arriving by noon, dressed to impress: pearls, pressed suits, perfume thick as syrup. Monica moved among them like a conductor, clipboard in one hand, flute of champagne in the other. I watched from the balcony. No one knew I was there. Tyler stood near the front doors, shaking hands, smiling that tight smile he'd mastered from years of corporate dinners. April hadn't arrived yet. I stepped back into the shadows, my heels silent on the carpet I once laid down myself, roll by roll before dawn. In my hand I held the envelope. Thick cardstock, no return address. Inside was the truth: ownership records, vendor correspondence, financial trails, and Monica's signature on contracts she had no right to sign. I wasn't going to make a scene. That would have been her way. Mine was quieter, more permanent. I slipped down the east staircase, careful not to be seen, entered the reception office, where the welcome packets sat, programs, favors, a guest book. I tucked the envelope deep into the bridal file, labeled Greaves Ross Wedding, private documents, for bride only. Then I left the office and walked through the venue one last time. Every floral arrangement was hers, Monica's style, big, loud, showy, but tucked behind the altar arch, almost hidden behind the runner, was something small, soft, a single white camellia, not part of the design plan, not listed in the floral order, just placed, deliberate. I leaned in. There was a note pinned beneath it, folded once. In handwriting I knew. April's. It said, "Thank you." I remember. So I pressed my fingers to the paper, barely breathing. The bridal march began upstairs. Chatter swelled. I stepped back, then turned toward the front doors. Before anyone could see me cry, I wasn't staying for the ceremony. This wasn't about reclaiming a seat. It was about reclaiming myself, and finally, letting them come to me. The rain started just as I reached the front steps. Not a downpour, just a mist, like the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to cry. I stood under the awning and looked back at the Briar House. Every arch, every brick, every chandelier behind those windows. I'd cleaned, painted, restored with my own two hands. Years of work, years of silence.
But that camellia?
That tiny white flower, it was louder than every speech Monica had ever made. I smiled, then turned down the sidewalk and walked away. No drama, no audience. Just peace. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the sewing room, no music, just the sound of the rain tapping against the glass and the steady rhythm of the needle in my hand. By sunset, the phone rang. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Miss Ellie?" April's voice. Small. Hesitant. "I'm here, sweetheart." There was a pause. Then I found the envelope. My hand stilled over the hem I was mending. "I figured you would." Her voice cracked.
Why didn't you tell me?
"Would you have believed me if I had?" Another pause. "No," she said quietly. "Not back then." I waited. Then she asked, "Is it all true?" "Yes." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, she told everyone she built it. Said she saved it from ruin. I know. She didn't even know where the circuit box was until last year. That made me chuckle. Still doesn't. April let out a shaky breath, half laugh, half sob. "She used you. We all did. I let her. You were young," I said, and it was easier to believe the polished version. "I feel so stupid." "No," I said gently. "You're just waking up." Another long silence. Then, "Would you come over? Tonight? Does she know you're calling?" "I don't care." That surprised me. I grabbed my coat. When I arrived at their apartment, April was waiting on the porch, barefoot, wedding hair undone. Her eyeliner was smudged and her dress replaced with a sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder. She didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug. "Tate, real. The kind that says I see you now, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like wallpaper, I felt like someone's home." April made tea, not the fancy kind Monica bought in tins from boutique stores, but old Earl Grey in a chipped mug, with too much honey and a spoon that clinked against the side. We sat at the kitchen table, two women, same blood, years apart in silence. She didn't know where to start, so I did. "Your dress," I said. You looked beautiful. Her eyes welled. I wore yours? That stopped me. She reached into the pantry and pulled out the garment bag. Not the designer one. The one you hemmed. The one you saved. I ran my fingers across the soft crepe. April sniffled. Mom lost it when she saw. Said it looked cheap on camera. But I didn't care. Why? Because when I wore it, I remembered who I was. Not her version. Mine. She paused. Then added, yours. The words settled over the room like dust in sunlight. I sipped my tea. She sipped hers. And for a long time, we just sat in the quiet. Finally, April leaned forward, voice trembling. Why did you let her take credit for everything? I didn't answer right away. Because the answer was heavy. Because it wasn't just about Monica. It was about grief and motherhood and all the invisible sacrifices women make when love is louder than pride. I wanted you to grow up with confidence, I said. Not with shame. Not with questions about why your family didn't have more. But we did, she said. You built more? Yes, I whispered. But I built it behind the curtain. April looked down at her hands. She told me you were lucky to be here. Said you were just helping. That it wasn't your vision. It wasn't luck, I said. And I stood up, walked to my purse, and pulled out the red folder. Set it on the table. I kept everything, I said, because I knew one day the truth would matter. April opened it slowly. Page after page of documents, contracts, articles, timelines. Her mouth parted in quiet disbelief. She used your name on press materials. Took a Founders Award in Chicago 2 years ago. I nodded. She said she started the Bridal Scholarship Fund. She didn't. April looked up, tears in her eyes. Why didn't Dad say anything? That one hurt more. I didn't answer. She didn't press. She just closed the folder and placed her hand on top of it. I'm going to fix this. You don't have to. I do, she said. Because if I don't, it keeps happening. And because you're the reason I ever believed I could build anything at all. The tea kettle hissed again on the stove. Neither of us moved to turn it off. Some silences are better left to boil. April asked me to stay the night. Monica wasn't home. She'd gone to decompress at a spa across town, her version of recovering from being sidelined at her own daughter's wedding. I slept on the couch. Same couch I'd gifted them 5 years ago when they moved in. Back then, Monica had called it quaint. Now it just creaked when I shifted and smelled faintly of lavender detergent. The next morning, I woke early. April was already up, sitting cross-legged on the floor, red folder open in front of her. She was highlighting things, scribbling notes in the margins. You didn't sleep, I said. Didn't want to. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice was steady. I made a list, she said, off everyone Mom gave interviews to. Publications. Blog sponsors? Half of them think she's the owner. I nodded. She was smart? No, April said sharply. She was cruel. That hung in the air a moment. She used your name like wallpaper, she added. Pretty in the background, convenient. That, too, was true. But what April didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that silence wasn't always surrender. Sometimes it was strategy. I reached over and tapped the page where Monica had accepted an award on Briarhouse's behalf. This one, I said. You'll need to start here. Public correction. But be kind. People respect grace more than bitterness. April looked up at me, brows knit. You still want to protect her? No, I said. I want to protect you. She didn't reply. She just stared at the folder a moment longer. Then stood up. I want you at the board meeting next week, she said. There's a vote scheduled. Monica's pushing for expansion without oversight. I'm going to block it. And I want them to hear from the founder herself. I blinked. The word hit something deep. Founder. For so long I'd been the ghost in the wallpaper. The cleaner, the helper, the woman who showed up early and left through the service door. Now my name was on the record. On paper. On her lips. All right, I said. April smiled. It was a small thing, but it reached her eyes. Before I left, she handed me back the dress, pressed, folded, and wrapped in fresh muslin. I want to pass it down someday, she said. And I want my daughter to know whose hands made it. That night, I brought the dress home and hung it in my closet. Beside it, I pinned the note she'd written, the one about feeling something real. The wind picked up outside. And for once, it didn't rattle the windows. It sang through them. The boardroom at Briarhouse had changed since I last stepped inside. New paint. New chairs. Sleek brass sconces instead of the old flickering overheads I'd helped install with a borrowed ladder 15 years ago. But the table? Still the same walnut slab I'd rescued from a bankrupt hotel auction and refinished by hand in my trailer's driveway. April sat beside me in a navy blazer and flats. No makeup, no script, just a pen, a notepad, and the folder she now carried like armor. Across from us, Monica arrived 5 minutes late. Of course, hair perfect, heels sharp, a pale silk blouse that whispered power. She paused when she saw me.
Just a flicker, then the smile.
"Ellie," she said, voice bright. "Didn't expect to see you at one of these." I smiled back. "I built the room," I said softly. "Seemed only right to sit in it again." April cleared her throat. "Let's get started." The agenda was dry at first: budgets, calendar blocks, vendor renewals. Monica breezed through it all like it was already hers. Until April turned the page. "One last item," she said. "Proposal 9C expansion vote. Request to use Briarhouse name on external branded events." Monica sat straighter. "Yes, we've been working on that initiative for months. Briarhouse Sorias, Briarhouse Bride Retreats, really promising partnerships." April didn't flinch. "And yet," she said, "all materials list you as founder and owner, not Eleanor Greaves." Monica blinked. "It's branding, April. I'm the face of the company. It's not personal." April pulled out the folder. "This is the deed of incorporation, tax filings, ownership certificates, press interviews misattributing credit, sponsor invoices, award transcripts." She slid it across the table. "All of it. None of this is branding. This is theft." The room went still. Even the intern in the corner stopped typing. Monica looked at me. "You're behind this?" I met her gaze calmly. "I'm not behind anything. I'm just done staying behind." She scoffed. "You always said the work mattered more than the recognition." "It still does," I said. "But erasure isn't humility. It's violence in pearls." April spoke again, her voice steady. "Effective immediately, all public materials will be corrected to reflect the company's actual history. Founder and sole owner Eleanor Greaves. Monica Ross is to remain creative director. Pending review." Monica stood up fast, the chair screeching. "You've poisoned her against me." April didn't rise. She didn't blink. "No," she said. "She gave me the truth. You just don't like what it looks like in daylight?" And that's when I knew. We weren't just reclaiming a brand. We were rebuilding a bloodline. Monica didn't speak again that day. She gathered her papers, her bag, her pride, and left without a backward glance. But the ripple she left behind, it shook everything. The Briarhouse staff started whispering. Vendors called too. Clarify the leadership structure. One of the bridal magazines reached out asking for an updated founder bio. I didn't respond right away. I was still learning how to speak as myself. The next day, April came by the house. No agenda, no folder. Just a Tupperware of lemon bars and a crooked smile. "I baked," she said, setting them on the table. "They're a little dense." "They'll go perfect with strong coffee," I said. We sat on the porch, watching the street lamp flicker through leaves. Autumn was coming in soft and early. After a long silence, April asked, "What happens now?" "You mean with Monica?" "With everything." I looked at the horizon, how the light caught the edges of roofs and wires and laundry lines. "You lead with honesty," I said, "and let the rest settle." April leaned back in her chair. "I always thought being a grown-up meant having the answers." "It doesn't," I said. "It means asking better questions." She looked over at me, eyes glassy. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" I didn't ask who. She meant me. I reached across and squeezed her hand. "There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart. You came back? We didn't need more than that." But later, before she left, April pulled out a folded draft of a press release. "Just read it? When you're ready," she said. "It's not polished. But it's yours." After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. CFOR Amendiati Realistic of Briarhouse Events is proud to acknowledge and celebrate its true founder and visionary, Eleanor Greaves. What began as a forgotten theater and a widow's second chance is now one of Oregon's premier venues, not because of branding or glossy campaigns, but because of grit, grace, and quiet brilliance. I folded it slowly, pressed it to my chest, let the words sink into my skin. It was never about applause, but being seen. That mattered more than I ever let myself believe. And now, finally I was. Have you ever let someone else take credit for what you built until it was almost too late? Would you speak up like April did? Or stay silent like I did for years? Tell me below. You never know who your story might free. Monica didn't leave quietly. 3 days after the board meeting, I received a letter, 4 pages long, printed on embossed stationery, signed with a flourish of looping M's. It was venom disguised as civility. She accused me of undermining her reputation, of staging a coordinated smear, of manipulating April like some sort of matriarchal puppet master. But the line that struck hardest came near the end. You may have built the bones of Briar House, Eleanor, but I gave it a soul. I sat at my kitchen table, rereading that line under the amber light of the stove lamp. Steam rose from my tea. The clock ticked in slow, tired seconds. And I laughed not bitterly, not cruelly, just softly, like something heavy had finally unlatched in my chest. Because Monica had never once mopped a floor after midnight, never repainted a wall by hand, never stayed until 2 a.m. comforting a crying bride whose bouquet didn't arrive. She didn't know the Briar House's soul because she had never bent low enough to touch it. But I had. That weekend, April and I met with the venue staff. Just the regulars, the florists, the event coordinators, the janitorial team. I brought lemon scones. April brought printouts. And we told them the truth. No threats, no speeches, just facts. Some cried. One of the junior coordinators, a girl named Lexi, asked, "Does this mean we'll finally get paid leave for setup overtime?" I blinked. April answered before I could. Yes, effective immediately. The room exhaled. Later, after the others had gone, April and I walked the length of the ballroom. It was empty, dim, echoing. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Waiting this long?" I paused by the far window, the one facing the street. "No," I said. "Because if I'd spoken too early, you wouldn't have believed me," she nodded, then said. "And if I hadn't seen the truth myself, I wouldn't have deserved to." Outside, the last of summer bent into fall. Inside, the chandeliers flickered on one by one, unprompted. Wired on the old-timer I'd installed myself, back when I couldn't afford electricians. One switch, one light at a time. And the room came back to life. Monica went live on Tuesday. A glossy livestream with soft lighting, perfect curls, and a strategically placed tissue box. She sat on a velvet settee, framed by peonies and carefully blurred family portraits. "I've always supported women," she began, voice trembling just enough, "especially older women who've struggled to find purpose after loss. I watched from my sewing room, tea in hand, TV on mute. Subtitles told me everything I needed. I took Eleanor in when she had nothing. Gave her structure, gave her pride. And now, she's turned my daughter against me." Cue the wipe of a single tear. The comments exploded, sympathy, outrage, confusion. Until someone, God bless the internet, linked the original ownership deed, then the IRS filings. Then the scholarship receipts in my name, dated years before Monica joined the Briar House. Receipts don't lie. The next morning, local reporters reached out for interviews. I declined them all. But April didn't. She held a press briefing on the front lawn of Briar House. No stage, no teleprompter, just a folding table and a microphone from the sound booth. "I want to clarify something," she said, standing tall in flats and a windbreaker. "My mother married into this family. She did not build this venue. She did not save it. She managed it for a while. And yes, she made it shiny. But my grandmother gave it breath." Reporters scribbled, clicked, leaned forward. April continued. "When Monica Ross took credit for years of sacrifice, she didn't just rewrite history. She erased a woman who gave her everything, silently, lovingly, and without condition." A pause. "My name is April Graves, and I'm proud to come from grit, not gloss." The press ate it up. By sundown, headlines read, The real woman behind Briar House steps forward. Granddaughter defends founder against step-mother's false claims. Monica posted a follow-up video, but the comments had turned. They weren't cruel, just cold. "Where's your proof? Fuff. Why wasn't your name on the deed?" Funny how the narrative changed after the documents dropped. Say, and just like that, her story
Unravel.
thread by thread, no scandal, no fight, just quiet accountability, the kind that stays. That Friday, I returned to the Briar House through the front doors, not the service entrance, not the back hallway with the creaky hinge I'd meant to fix for years, no apron, no gloves, just me, Eleanor Ruth Graves, owner, founder, finally present. Lexi from the events team greeted me first. "Miss Ellie," she started, then paused. "Or Miss Graves." I smiled. "Ellie's fine, dear." But the way she said it, gentle, a touch of reverence, told me the title wasn't what mattered anymore. Respect was. In the main hall, a new portrait stood on an easel, black frame. Soft lighting. May, 10 years younger, caught mid-laugh in the ballroom, flower on my cheek from a cupcake disaster. I hadn't even known the photo existed. Below it, a small brass plate, Viva's founder, builder. Quiet storm. I stood there longer than I meant to. Long enough for vendors to pass with flowers. long enough for Tyler to arrive. He stood beside me, quiet. I didn't know, he said. Not the full story. I kept my eyes on the portrait. You didn't ask. He flinched, but nodded. I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it? His voice cracked at the edges. I should have stood up sooner. I turned to him. You still can? I said. He blinked. Then slowly, like something old was shedding, he wrapped his arms around me. Not a polite hug, a son's embrace. I miss Dad, he whispered. Me too, I said. Do you think he'd be proud? I pulled back just enough to look at him. I think he'd tell you it's never too late to come home. That evening, April brought Tommy to visit. He ran down the hall barefoot, skidding on the polished floor, and threw his arms around my waist.
Abila.
Can I have lemonade? I laughed. You can have two. Monica didn't call that weekend. She didn't text, didn't post. But someone sent flowers, no card, just camellias. The kind that mean, I'm sorry without saying the words. I placed them in the front vestibule, beside the guest book, didn't tell anyone where they came from. Some silences deserve to stay soft, and not everything broken needs to be fixed. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. The first Monday of October, I handed April the master key. It was heavier than it looked. Brass, cool in the palm, shaped like a cathedral window. I'd carried it in my coat pocket for years. The grooves were worn smooth by habit. April hesitated before taking it. You sure? I nodded. I've kept the lights on long enough. Now it's your turn to keep them warm. She smiled, nervous, proud. I don't want to mess it up. You will, I said. Everyone does. That's how you learn where the cracks are. We stood outside the Breyer house in the early morning chill. The sun hadn't climbed past the trees yet, and the street was still wet with dew. Fall always comes earlier in Astoria, clinging to the coast like a hush. April tucked the key into her bag. I stepped back, watched her unlock the doors, watched her walk into the building I'd built with bruised hands and quiet faith. And then, for the first time in over 20 years, I didn't follow her in. Instead, I walked downtown, to the old bakery next to the post office where Mrs. Tanaka had finally retired and the storefront stood empty. The window still had flaking gold paint from her specialty macarons sign. I cupped my hands around my face to see through the glass. The place needed work. The counters were dusty. The floor needed new linoleum. But the bones were good, just like Breyer House once had been. By noon, I'd called a contractor. By Friday, the lease was in my name. But this wasn't going to be a shop. No pastries. No brides. This place would be for women like me. Women who'd raised children and buried husbands. Women who'd been dismissed, overlooked, talked over. Women who still had dreams they hadn't dared name out loud. The sign would bloom skills and stories for women 6 There'd be sewing classes, resume workshops, legal Q&As, a big bulletin board labeled, "What I'm Still Learning," and on Sunday mornings, we'd serve hot coffee and let the widows laugh without apology. I didn't need headlines anymore. I didn't need chandeliers. I just needed a room where invisible women could see each other and say, I thought I was the only one. Because the truth is, we never are. Target 600 words. A word spread faster than I expected. By the second week, 12 women showed up, some with notebooks, some with casseroles, one with a dog named Harvey who barked every time anyone said the word taxes. We didn't start with grand speeches. We started with scissors and thread. Elaine, a retired librarian, hadn't touched a sewing machine in 30 years. By the end of our first Thursday, she'd stitched a tote bag with pockets deeper than most people's patience. Sandra brought a shoebox full of rejection letters. She was 67, had applied for 27 part-time jobs since her husband passed, and hadn't heard back from a single one. They see the gray hair and assume I'm slow, she said. Then we'll show them you're lightning in disguise. I told her. We practiced interviews in front of the mirror. I taught her how to hold silence without flinching, how to lean in without apology. The next week, she landed a job at the Marina office. On week 3, I brought in a guest speaker, Gloria, a former paralegal, who taught the group how to read a basic contract and avoid common financial scams. Just because you're kind, she told them, doesn't mean you should be easy to fool. The women nodded like churchgoers. Every session ended the same way, with someone crying, not from sadness, but from recognition. I forgot I had ideas, one said. I forgot I could speak without asking permission first, another whispered. I just listened. Let them fill the room with things they'd never been allowed to say out loud. One afternoon, April dropped by. She stood in the doorway, watching a group of women gathered around a bulletin board filled with post-it notes. Each note finished the sentence of, "Before I die, I want to
Learn to salsa?
forgive my sister, start over without shame." April read them in silence, then turned to me. "Is this what legacy looks like?" "No," I said. "This is what freedom looks like. Legacy comes later, when someone else carries the torch." She smiled, stepped forward, and picked up a pen. Wrote her own note. "Make space for women like my grandmother." I didn't cry, but my hands trembled when I pressed it to the board. Because for the first time since Rob died, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was planting things. Things that might bloom after me. 3 months later, I stood at the back of the Briar House during the winter fundraiser, an annual gala I'd once cleaned up after unseen. This time, I wasn't holding a mop. I was holding a microphone. The lights were low, the chandeliers glowing like constellations. Around me, women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s mingled in satin shawls and orthopedic heels. Laughing, confident, no longer pretending to shrink, April had insisted I speak. I told her no 3 times. She smiled each time and waited anyway, so here I was. I tapped the mic once. The room hushed. "I used to think silence was my strength," I began. That keeping my head down, doing the work, and letting others shine meant I was noble. A pause. I found April's face in the crowd. Tyler's too. Tommy leaned against his dad's leg, bored in his clip-on tie. "But it's not noble to vanish," I continued. "It's not brave to disappear in the name of peace." Murmurs. Eyes wet. What I built here wasn't just a venue, it was a vessel. And for years, I let someone else steer it while I stayed below deck. Now the room was still, breathless, but I'm above deck now, and I see you, all of you. And if you've ever been made to feel like your worth expired with your waistline or your last paycheck, come find me. I've got a key with your name on it. Soft laughter. Applause. Hesitant at first, then rolling like thunder against old walls. Afterward, a woman in a red scarf came up to me.
I'm 82.
She said. "My daughter told me not to bother coming tonight. Said I'd just slow her down." I looked her in the eye. "And yet here you are." She squeezed my hand. "You reminded me I'm not done yet." "Neither am I thought." Not by a long shot. I came home to a plain envelope on the front step. No return address. Just my name. Handwritten in ink that had blood slightly in the drizzle. Inside, one photograph and a single sheet of paper. The photo was old. Maybe 20 years. I was in the garden behind the trailer, Tyler on my hip, April laughing as she reached for the hose. Monica stood off to the side, arms crossed, lips tight, but there.
Whole. Unbroken.
The letter was short. "I've Eleanor X. I still don't agree with how it ended, guys. But I see now that I was wrong about the beginning. There was a time you gave us everything, and I pretended it came from somewhere else. It didn't. Came from you, so don't expect a speech. You never needed mine anyway. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not an apology, not quite, but it didn't need to be. It was an acknowledgement. A thread in the tapestry finally woven straight. I slipped the letter into the same folder April had carried for weeks. Not to use, not to share, just to keep. A record of something once crooked, bending back toward the truth. I placed the photo on the mantel next to one of Tommy and me from last weekend, him covered in frosting, grinning like his smile might outlive gravity. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet, I opened the back door. The wind smelled like cedar and salt. Same as it did the day I first returned to Astoria. I stood barefoot on the porch, feeling the old boards under my feet, noticing how they creaked differently now. How I creaked differently, too. I wasn't new wood anymore, but I was solid, weathered, and still standing. Inside, the kettle whistled. In the living room, my notebook waited. Tomorrow, I'd teach a class on how to write your story from the middle. Not the start, not the end, but from wherever you are. Because sometimes that's the only place you can begin, and that's enough. Now that you've heard my story, I want to hear yours. Have you ever been written off, only to rise quietly on your own terms? Have you carried something heavy in silence, waiting for someone to ask? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. You're not invisible here. You're not alone. We built this space for women like us, strong, soft, weathered, rising. So share your story, speak your truth. And if you're listening from a small town like mine, tell me where you are. Let's see how far quiet power can travel.